All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment we have all been waiting for. So excited to share with you this interview with Xavier Poussard, the journalist who initially broke the Brigitte Macron scandal via a publication. He did multiple series in it, collaborative work with Natasha Ray, who had helped him. You'll hear about that. So much is leading up to this moment, obviously. So I just wanted to let you know when I sat down with him at the end of last year, never in a million years could I have imagined that Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte would be sending me a legal letter. I believe because they knew that this interview was going to be forthcoming and they did not want this series to happen. And in many ways, this series may not have happened had it not been for me digging my feet further into the ground simply because I believe in free speech and I believe in information and I believe that what is happening in France is evil. Xavier Poussard has never before this moment appeared on camera. He has been remarkably private about his work. He has dedicated years of his life, has dealt with the brunt of what I would describe as a totalitarian government in France coming after him and his family. He has uprooted his family and had to move to Italy to make sure that they were safe and make sure that they were protected. And of course, he is not the only one. But this interview is a culmination of a year worth of work, really a year last year where I read just the tip of the iceberg and recognized that this was an explosive story. And then when Xavier Poussard and I initially sat down and we just showed a picture of him, YouTube moved to take the interview entirely off and essentially said that we weren't allowed to discuss cults or imply anything about cults, but we felt that they had perhaps been contacted by someone with a lot of power. Well, this time, what we've done as a response is we built an entire website where we can put interviews like this up without the fear of having them taken down. And of course, that's at CandaceOwens.com. Just to let you guys know, when he and I were sitting down, I was still trying to comprehend elements of the story. So you may hear me ask questions as the viewers would ask questions, trying to understand exactly what it was that he was suggesting. That's why we felt that making this a series so that you guys could at least have the backing of the first 6 episodes to comprehend what he is saying, which I think most of you do now, was so important to us, so important to the team. We have put so much work into this, and I am just truly humble in all of this, grateful to Xavier Poussard, Natasha Ray, and all of the journalists who have braved the French government, really, and the evil of the French government to bring us to this moment. So without further ado, here is Xavier Poussard. Xavier, I really don't even know where to begin here. I already feel like this is going to be the biggest story of the year, and we're only in January. And so I think just for my audiences and everybody worldwide, just tell us how you got involved in the Brigitte Macron, Emmanuel Macron story, what your background is, and what piqued your interest.
Alors, je me suis intéressé à Brigitte Macron, tout simplement parce que je fais des portraits de presse.
So I got into this subject because I'm interested in press portraits, and that means I specialize in unauthorized press portraits, the sort of things that people might not want somebody to say about them. But I do so with a conscience, and I do so as accurately as possible.
And so they sort of dropped this biography, Brigitte Macron, Emmanuel Macron. There's this unofficial biography that gets dropped about them. And what is the first thing that strikes you as peculiar?
Ce qui était très étrange dans le cas d'Emmanuel Macron,
There was an over-mediatization. The mainstream media decided to very strongly attack the other candidates during the 2017 presidential election, particularly Penelope Fillon, and sort of hail and laud everything surrounding Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte. They were essentially attacking the far right, everyone apart from them. So they tried to paint this picture of Macron as being a sort of Mozart-esque figure, that he was very virtuous and precarious. They began forming a narrative that he had met this woman when he was 17 years old. So this man of great precarious nature, a conqueror, a virtuoso, who no one could resist, essentially just as Mozart was. So the first lie was regarding age. A journalist had compiled a combination of the amount of times it was noted that they initially spun a narrative of him being 17 years old and her being 36. And so it was sort of this brave man, going after the woman he loved at a young age because he was just a daring young chap, so to say. Whereas, in fact, he was 14 at the time and she was 39, which turns it from a brave story into a story of pedophilia and the abuse of a minor. When their real age was brought to light, there were many mechanisms of communication in the play from the couple. They really played on the way the story was brought to the public. It was sort of like Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman's movie Wag the Dog, where they used a spin doctor who brought certain messages to the public to distract them from the actual true scandal at hand. But there was a narrative spun of the difference in age being an issue between a man being younger and a woman being of an older age, whereas the difference of age was exactly the same between, for example, Donald Trump and Melania, yet no one batted an eye there. However, the issue is not so much the difference in age, and people sort of jumped on the bandwagon here and said, well, why? It's so unfair how a man with a more advanced age being with a younger woman is not an issue, but the reverse is quite scandalous. But that is not the issue here. It's an issue of the age of Macron at the time when he was 14. So this is clearly the abuse of a minor rather than just having a salacious story of a difference between the age of a man and a woman.
So essentially what you're saying is the media tried to do the modern feminist spin on this. Somebody got involved and said, we'll take the feminist angle, the sexist angle, the misogynist angle, the ageist angle, and say, you only notice this because it's an older woman. And why is that a problematic if it's okay for Donald Trump to be dating Melania? It's actually a very smart way to try to spin it. But you're going, no. This is not about the age gap between because it's a man or a woman. Emmanuel Macron was just 14 years old and she was 39.
D'ailleurs, ce que je t'ai expliqué.
Actually, Brigitte Macron was on the front page of The Economist, and there was this constant push on the left to guilt people that the idea of patriarchal society is not right. They tried to portray Brigitte Macron as this Barbie doll or pinup to the public. I believe a firm noted that in 2018, there was more content on Brigitte Macron on the internet than there was on David Beckham, who's obviously far more renowned. And the internet became saturated with these curated pictures and often doctored pictures to make her seem appealing in a pinup and focusing on her attire, etc., rather than what was really going on. Insiders in power knew, but the media didn't focus on her increasing level of political importance, which was far greater than most first ladies had in the past. They saw there were no pictures of her as a child or as a mother. They saw there was no real background on her. And initially, it was well-meaning for journalists. They just wanted to build upon this narrative which had been created around her. She's this feminist icon. She's big in politics. Let's tell her story. But they failed every time. They always faced a brick wall in the end. And I would just like to give you two quotes from journalists who are not some conspiracy people. They're real journalists. The first is a woman named Virginie Lenhart. She's Ashkenazi Jewish and reports on the Holocaust and such topics on French television. She said, I needed photos of Brigitte Macron as a young woman with small children, showing an itinerary outside of those stamped by the Bestimage agency. What doesn't come out is anything to do with her former life. It's a total blackout. The second journalist is Sylvie Baumel, who does portraits in the French edition of Vanity Fair. She said while conducting her investigation, it's like an episode of Black Mirror, where the president's offices have found a way to penetrate the brains of his former acquaintances and erase everything. So we are facing something completely incredible. All these journalists who are saying, let's tell the story of Brigitte Macron, they find this woman to be something almost paranormal.
Remind you guys about American financing because I know the average person finds it difficult to keep up with monthly expenses. In most cases, there is little left at the end of the month to cover any extras. Most Americans aren't getting a big raise, expenses are up, and it is very hard to manage without using credit cards. So if you're a homeowner and you're frustrated with that cycle, I need you to make a 10-minute no-obligation call today to my friends at American Financing. If you're carrying a credit card balance each month with a rate in the 20s or even the 30s, American Financing can show you how to put your hard-earned equity to work and get you out of debt. Their salary-based mortgage consultants are saving their customers an average of $800 a month. If you get started today, you may not even have to make next month's mortgage payment. There are no upfront fees, so it costs nothing to find out how much you could be saving every month. So call American Financing today at 800-795-1210. Again, that's 800-795-1210, or visit americanfinancing.net/Owens. That's americanfinancing.net/Owens. So these are not conspiracy journalists. These aren't people on Reddit that are trying to make noise. What you're saying is these people were well intended. They were interested in this feminist angle. They thought this is going to be an amazing story to cover how this woman came to power, sort of like doing a profile piece on Michelle Obama during the Obama years. And they were sort of going, wait a minute, where is this person? How did this person come to be? I've never seen such a black hole. And this kind of gets into maybe something you never thought you were going to expect here as you were digging into this. You expected probably some holes in the story, but not, I guess, what you discovered next.
Alors parallèlement, moi je m'y intéresse parce que je fais des archives.
So what I do in my job is I archive things. This is what I really enjoy. I like going back into details and back into history and looking at people's problems. I had a bunch of people around me, my contacts in Paris, some mainstream journalists in the media who were egging me to say things. They said, go on, this is what you do. This is what I do. I take information and share it when other journalists cannot. And all of a sudden, I came across someone in my informal work surroundings, and he said, this is a man. Like, surely you can see this is a man. As if it was the most straightforward, obvious comment he could make about it. Another one of my colleagues, he's a civil servant, he calls her Amanda, which is a reference to Amanda Lear. There was a similar case. It's not well known in the United States, but Amanda Lear, she was a somewhat notorious figure. She was a muse to Salvador Dali. She was a singer and a television star. She's famous in France, so her biographies were written and rewritten, and every time they were rewritten, there were small discrepancies with dates and timelines. I got the same impression when I read Brigitte Macron's biographies. For example, the death of a sister in 1960, but we'd later learn it was 1961. Then the death of a niece the following year. But then when we would go dig for the information, we'd discover actually, in fact, she died in 1966. Then she says, I bought my house. We bought our house in the Le Touquet in 1950. We'd then go dig. It was actually 1957. And each time, like that, the story is modified. So, in fact, we say to ourselves, what is this thing? There was this element of creating complexity and confusion in order to essentially hide the elephant in the room. Going back to Amanda Lear was born Alain Tappé. He is very well known today. In fact, she was unmasked because at one time in her life, she called herself Peggy from Oslo, and she was actually Mick Jagger's drug dealer. So we are still experiencing these very borderline behaviors. My point is, this avenue of a transsexual persona has been created before, but it's very dangerous to try to delve into it because you run the risk of being branded a madman. Who is this man claiming this absurdity? Is he crazy? So I was facing that risk. I started talking to my broader network. I started going to everyone I knew trying to figure out what was going on because I knew there was a story here and I wanted to deepen myself within the story. But the French, all in all, don't realize what's going on. It's not really on their radar. They're not quite aware as to how big this is. All of a sudden, I get a number from this girl called Natasha Ray. She's just a normal citizen, not a journalist. She claims to be able to prove Brigitte Macron is a man. So we begin to exchange ideas and work together for a month.
And is this the moment when you were first introduced to, I guess, the name, the person, Jean-Michel Trogneux? Because prior to, there were essentially just no pictures of Brigitte Macron for 30 plus years of his or her life. And was it Natasha that first brought forth the name to you, Jean-Michel Trogneux?
Alors, c'est quelque chose d'intéressant.
So this is something interesting. I had identified this name in the archives of documents found in the commercial courts. I ordered a lot of documents from the commercial courts called the INPI to trace companies. I was interested in the Trogneux, and I saw this name appear which did not appear in the biographies. I realized that Emmanuel Macron wasn't really selling well to the public as a persona. He was in managerial positions and in hedge funds, and the public wasn't really gripped by this. When they decided to create a presidential candidate, they tried to focus more on the background of Brigitte Macron's family, the Trogneau family, who are a family of chocolatiers from Amiens, France, since it is a family which is rooted in the real country, in the real economy. That is to say, they are not bankers at Rothschilds. They don't do mergers and acquisitions. They make chocolates. They were even compared to the Kennedys in the French press. At that moment, we said to ourselves, why is there this insistence on each brother, each sister, each niece, etc., except one, Jean-Michel Trogneau? Jean-Michel was erased, and Natasha told me that a family photo, which was supposed to have Brigitte on her mother's lap, had been shown to the press, and she told me, but look closely at the little boy. This is Jean-Michel Trogneau. By process of elimination, it is Jean-Michel Trogneau, and this hidden brother, if you look closely, is actually Brigitte Macron. She was fully convinced, and I thought, it's very disturbing. It's worth cross-checking.
So in America, there's an expression, um, we say the dog that doesn't bark, right? So what's quite interesting is this is the dog that's not barking. There's all of this information about all the family members, and you recognize that there's no information about this family member. And that photograph that we saw of their family in Amiens, I remember the first time that I saw that photo because that's actually what got me involved in the case. It was, for me, a matter of common sense. I just looked at the photo, and the Daily Mail was trying to tell me that the little girl on the lap was young Brigitte, and I just looked over to the left of the photo, and I said, "No, I have 2 eyes." Obviously, I don't even know what the theory is, but that's clearly Brigitte, a very distinct face. You can't really change your face. Well, I guess you can, but, it was very distinct to me. So this is sort of, what Natasha noticed is you're looking at this family photo, you're looking into Amiens, you're looking into this chocolatiers, and you're noticing that this boy on the left, you don't know anything about whatsoever. S What happens next?
Alors, moi, je me dis dans mon journal,
In an article, I stated that, this is a legitimate question. It's one worth posing. Why is Brigitte hiding parts of her past? And why is there such an unwillingness to speak about Jean-Michel? What really prompted me to pursue this question was when Natasha and I started speaking about this, they detained her on order of a cousin of Brigitte Macron. Natasha would develop an in-depth thesis on how Brigitte Macron is Jean-Michel Trogneau and who Brigitte's children actually belong to. We then realized further that one of the cousins was trying to set us up by giving us details which weren't quite accurate, essentially sending us down the wrong avenues. They tried manipulating Natasha, myself, since I relied on this thesis for information, and another reporter as well, into pursuing these false leads, perhaps on order from the Élysée and the government itself.
Okay, so that's fascinating because and this was also something that, again, I always tell my listeners, just common sense, right? So I'm just thinking, I'm the First Lady of France, I'm Candace. If somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, your brother doesn't exist or your sister doesn't exist," I'm gonna take an opportunity to do a press conference. I'm gonna stand next to my brother, and I'm gonna say, "Conspiracy theories are harmful, let's put this to bed." I wouldn't contact the French equivalent to the Secret Service and have them detain a journalist that's working on a story. That instantly flags me as very odd. So you're saying in addition to this, they're also giving you misinformation, ironically,
hmm,
and trying to get you to arrive at the wrong conclusion. So you've got intimidation and you have misinformation, and all you're doing at this point is researching. You haven't even arrived at any conclusions, but that's probably making you feel like, what's going on here?
alors on sentait,
We realized there was a problem here since the power we were facing was becoming quite fidgety and nervous. So when Natasha brought out her thesis, she wanted to publish it quickly. I was reserved as I still only believed it was just a hypothesis that needed more. Well, the Élysée, they followed up on it, but instead of attacking the core subject, they were attacking little details. She was convicted of defamation, but it's hard for the public to understand this, as I was never convicted of anything, and she's only convicted by small details which aren't important to the meat of her argument. Once the story broke in 2021 and it was brought to light, Russia covered it, China covered it. They could have so easily at this point debunked it, showed 3 family photos, but they didn't. They could have even done so with a fake or troll account, had one with 80 plus people that could have said, no, listen, I'm so-and-so's cousin and here is a picture, just to debunk the whole story. But they didn't, whereas they had done so in the past. When figures like Bolsonaro had been attacking her appearance, certain family members had come out and had spoken against that. But when it actually came to these rather large allegations, nothing was ever rebutted by the family. The Élysée just kept trying to tear apart the story, but only in the details rather than the substance. Natasha Ray, an ordinary citizen, had allowed everyone to discover a state secret.
Could you explain to people how it would be possible for Brigitte Macron to have mothered or fathered children, just so that part is very clear to them?
Alors, c'est sur ce point que je voudrais être le plus...
The 2 journalists I spoke about earlier, who both had a difficult time investigating Brigitte Macron's past, the first one came out with the famous family photo and a photo of Brigitte Macron during her first communion. The second journalist found Brigitte Macron's wedding photo taken in 1974. She is 10 years old in the communion photo and 21 in the wedding photo. But when you look at the photos closely, you can see that it is not Brigitte Macron. At that time, Natasha Ray's thesis was that they had given a photo of Tiffaine, Brigitte Macron's daughter, as the communicant, and the wedding photo was Laurence, Tiffaine's sister, getting married. It was very complicated since, in fact, this wedding photo was taken from an announcement which had been published in the local press at the time, and that would imply someone had actually made a fake newspaper and photos to finally publish a photo of Laurence. All this was very vague, and with the media coverage of Natasha Ray's thesis going on at the same time, the Élysée finally had to admit that Jean-Michel Trogneux existed by showing a person who was present at the inauguration of Emmanuel Macron. We have been told he's this little chubby man. When we saw this, we couldn't believe that the boy in the family photo had grown into this man.
So at this point, they had to admit that this Jean-Michel Trogneux character was real and essentially what you're referring to, which I did see this, they are then trying to establish almost a new legacy. They're trying to keep up with all of the questions, and they did present this photo, which again, I had not read the backstory, but I looked at that what was clearly too modern of a photo to be Brigitte, and I looked at it and I said, "Wait, this is her daughter, Tiffaine. This looks like Tiffaine," and they sort of just like recolorized it into black and white, which was quite strange.
Alors, moi, à ce
I
moment-là...
continued to ask questions and continued to publish stories of the boy and this character, the little chubby man. But at this point, I didn't wish to get involved in what the viewer was thinking. So I didn't want to form an opinion, and instead I just kept sharing the information I was given through Natasha. But I didn't form my own stance on the matter. I just wanted to relay Natasha's thesis in a way which would be ironclad and unassailable by someone.
So at this point, just to slow this down for our audiences, like I said, they're trying to keep essentially feed more lies to the public. And this is actually, and we'll get into Sigmund Freud and we'll get into the modern media, but they essentially believe that if you give so much information, it becomes so confusing that the public essentially just gives up because you just go, I can't follow this. So now they've introduced this photo. They acknowledge that Jean-Michel Trogneux exists, but they're not really answering questions on that. They're also introducing, like you said, the photo of Tiffaine, which is recolorized for whatever reason. Then you have a third photo of somebody who is this the wedding photo you're talking about? The marriage photo, and they're presenting a third photo. None of these are the same people, but it allows the public to be confused, essentially.
Voilà, il y avait une confusion, mais mon...
There was still a lot of confusion at this time. My investigation was just called The Mystery of Brigitte Macron, and I would publish small pieces of evidence and let the public decide for themselves. Then, a file was published in December 2021 and later in June 2022 by a journalist named Emmanuelle Alisson. She spent most of her career with Le Monde in their weekly newspaper, which is the equivalent in France of the New York Times. She's a leftist and a 50-something-year-old mainstream media woman, but curious and sincere about looking into Brigitte Macron. So she starts following the story and considers these articles to be sexist attacks upon Brigitte Macron, but she does see that there's some other deeper underlying issue here. She starts following Natasha Ray and relaying the stories, and although I knew that these stories would then be relayed in a very fake news fashion to where the doors would be open onto her, which might not be open onto me in the same way since I was sort of a more problematic figure in terms of the mainstream media, I ultimately felt that she would be someone they would actually give information to given her background as a mainstream media journalist and her approach. I then decided to go back to the archives, more specifically departmental archives, and find all the class lists. So I found the class lists of Brigitte Trogneux, and then I found the class lists for Jean-Michel Trogneux, which were about 100 people each. I then listed them, filed them, and started to contact each one of them in order to get their accounts to see where that would lead, and relayed this to Emmanuel Alisson. In the archives, I could see that Brigitte Trogneux was there because, in contrast, Natasha thought that she, the real sister of Jean-Michel Trogneux, never actually existed, but I found out she did because she was on these lists. However, we couldn't quite figure out who Brigitte Macron was. Was she a Trogneux? Was Jean-Michel, the chubby guy we mentioned earlier, actually Brigitte Macron? We just couldn't quite place her exactly, but we knew she had existed. I found it quite complicated because I was dealing with people from Brigitte Macron's generation who were 70 to 80 years old, and I was in Italy at the time, calling them using WhatsApp, trying to get pictures, but it was hard for the men to remember much about Jean-Michel Trogneux. However, the one common thread was that many of the women, specifically the women who were supposedly in Brigitte Trogneux's class, would say, "We cannot remember her, we don't recognize her from the photos, we can't quite place her," and this phenomena kept coming up over and over again. And on top of this, I made sure to record everything so that nothing could be held against me legally down the line.
Fascinating. So you're going through the class lists and you're coming across the name Brigitte Trogneux, but when you actually speak to the classmates, they have no recollection of a Brigitte Trogneux.
Et moi, je me disais, bon, à ce moment-là, on est
In
en...
June 2023, I was thinking, this is all too weird. I still didn't, after all my research, have a single confirmed photo of Brigitte Trogneux or Jean-Michel Trogneux at this point. The journalist from Le Monde, who had signed a contract stipulating she would have to incorporate the words fake news into her title, she decided to go to Amiens to meet people, so I gave her a short list of 5 people to interview. So from the 100 people that I had accumulated for each class, I shortlisted them to 5 for Brigitte and 5 for Jean-Michel. So she goes to Amiens and she gets more information and photos. And there's this one photo in particular from 1976, a wedding photo where you can clearly see the bride is Brigitte Trogneux. There are 2 more pictures that I'll show you exclusively. So I decided to use facial recognition software from China, which is extremely accurate, and compared the pictures of Brigitte Trogneux and Brigitte Macron. With this, I realized that, in fact, Brigitte Macron was not Brigitte Trogneux, not the person they were showing in the childhood pictures, but in fact, Jean-Michel Trogneux is Brigitte Macron. Jean-Michel Trogneux was also not the little chubby guy we mentioned earlier. I concluded from this that Brigitte Macron is actually Jean-Michel Trogneux, born in 1945 in Amiens, and that this individual assumed the identity of their sister, Brigitte Trogneux, in 1986. So it's really a story of identity theft.
So she goes to Amiens, the Le Monde journalist, and you guys realize at this point that you're getting a match with this Chinese software that they use for social credit scores. And they're telling you, hey, it's not this Brigitte Trogneux, it's this Jean-Michel Trogneux that's a match.
Voilà.
The Brigitte Macron is Jean-Michel Trogneux, not Brigitte Trogneux.
Je précise aussi que la
I'd also
reconnaissance
point
faciale-
out that this facial recognition software is very visual, very accurate, and allows you to present evidence that would withstand any defamation charges in court. But I will show you all the data from this software analysis of these pictures so you can clearly see here that it's him.
I mean, it's one of these things where I tell people you just believe your own eyes. That was all it took for me. As I read one Daily Mail article, and they were trying to tell me that this little girl was Brigitte, when it was very obvious that that person right there is Brigitte. That I mean, it's just Brigitte Macron's entire face. So what are we looking at here? This is a class photo? What year for Brigitte, or I guess rather for Brigitte Macron? Jean-Michel Trogneau is sitting in this photo.
Alors, ce qui est intéressant
What
d'ailleurs,
I invite people to do at home is to pause the screen and take a good look at the photo and question oneself, how can one recognize Jean-Michel Trogneau in a photo when looking at a person one has never previously seen? I consider it an interesting question how he's so easy to recognize in this photo. It's because he leaves quite an impression on you. In the second photo, it's the same effect as the first one, where the similarity is so flagrant that I even questioned myself whether there might be some sort of setup. Was this picture provided by a close contact of the Trogneaus? I questioned whether they were just manipulating me and the other journalists again. So in order to have certainty about my findings and to see if every institution was being manipulated, I went to the Jesuit archives to obtain the class photo for Jean-Michel Trogneau. It took a while to amass these, and I had to go through the administrative courts since they were taking longer than usual. Eventually, I obtained them and gathered them with the previous photos I had. I realized I now had obtained pictures of an even better quality, where the facial recognition doesn't leave much to the imagination. From this cross-reference, it was even more evident that Jean-Michel Trogneau is Brigitte Macron.
Oh, sorry, what is the source of that photo on the left? That's the photo from when Brigitte was a teacher, yes? A
yes,
drama teacher?
it is a drama teacher. C'est Brigitte quand elle a rencontré Emmanuel Macron. Et on nous l'avait vendu.
So the last very important point is the teeth. The level of manipulation becomes quite blatant because on the current photo she has straight teeth, but on the family photo she had her teeth redone. The photo was reworked to achieve this. You can see this when comparing the old class photos to the family photo. What they were doing was painting a picture of her as being a mix between Claudia Schiffer and Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society as this pinup. They even enhanced her eye, straightened her teeth, and in general reworked the photo to make her appear more beautiful. It's truly vicious that this lie is shown to the public and just how far they went to manipulate the public.
And it's interesting because it's not the only time that they have manipulated a photo, which you were showing me offline, but even that original photo that they gave to the public, which I had never noticed before until you pulled it up. But in that original family Amiens photo, you see that there's a lampshade in the back, and then the lampshade completely disappears. And this photo was only entered into the public from Brigitte's family themselves. So this is not like a journalist manipulated this. This means that they are intentionally manipulating photos from Jean-Michel Trogneau's childhood.
Oui, alors, ça c'est un épisode qui est aussi...
What I find fascinating about doing this research was initially I felt I wasn't even taking much risk because it was just so flagrant. Put simply, the case stinks. There's something here that smells fishy. Even in the family photo, the viewer's eye is drawn to Brigitte Trogneau since we are told that Brigitte Trogneau is Brigitte Macron. She's the little girl on the mother's lap. And then there is this little boy there. Look closely at this little boy. It's the same Brigitte Macron we know from facial recognition. When you look at the photo, they modified the lampshade. Initially, the press showed a picture with the lampshade, then they showed the picture without the lampshade in order to not draw attention to the boy, and then they removed the boy altogether. They also published the communicant photo and said it was Brigitte Macron, so the propaganda here is so blatant. All this communication was led by a woman and ex-nightclub owner named Michelle Marchand, also known as Mimi, who is linked to the French deep state and intelligence. In France, they even refer to her as the Pope of the French press. She's quite famous for spinning false narratives and making fake documents. For example, she tarnished the reputation of a businessman named Omar Faouche by having false Interpol profiles created in his name and distributed in Parisian newsrooms, destroying his reputation by making it appear that he was wanted by police. She can easily make narratives to either sully or glorify someone. She plays a disproportionate role in controlling the image of Brigitte and Emmanuel Macron. In 2018, a bombshell report came out that stated she covered up a sentence for the son of an aristocrat named Marc Ladurée du Lacharier for a count of distributing child pornography online. When the Macrons wanted to get rid of Mimi, she blackmailed them by revealing, in a secret way, the transsexual narrative surrounding Brigitte Macron. She revealed that Brigitte was operated on by two men at an American-style hospital in Neuilly in 2019. One of the surgeons references a quote by Victor Hugo which says, "A woman's skin is the perfect tool and the perfect material to work with." However, it turns out that this quote by Victor Hugo is the motto of the other surgeon named Patrick Bouy. Patrick Bouy is someone who specializes in feminizing male traits. So Michel Marchand essentially made these two surgeons come out and reveal their story as to how they operated on Brigitte Macron. What's even more impressive is that the Legion of Honor Award, the most prestigious award anyone can receive in France, was granted to Patrick Bouy by Brigitte Macron. And in fact, there's a picture of her giving him this award, even though the Élysée never officially had this on their agenda.
Whoa, whoa. I did not catch this at all. So this is really some breaking news. I had no idea. So you're essentially saying they had sort of hired this person who was known to be a fixer, and then they were kind of pushing this person out of their life, and this person went nuclear and essentially exposed the fact that not only was Brigitte Macron a transsexual, but also had encouraged these doctors who had worked on Brigitte Macron to come out and tell their story. And you're saying they did do this, that the doctors who actually operated on Brigitte took credit for it publicly. Where did they say this? Where was this announced? Did the press cover this?
C'est la papesse de la presse.
Yes, so to be clear, Michel Marchand is the one who revealed it rather than having the doctors reveal it themselves. She leaked it about them to the press.
Okay, and then did the doctors deny it? Did Patrick Bouy say that's true or that's not true, or did not say anything?
Did not say anything, but it is official, you know. Et alors, pour conclure...
So, to conclude all this evidence, I posed myself a question. If Brigitte is in fact Jean-Michel Trogneau, she must have at some point joined the army because there was a compulsory service in France at the time. So I went to Amiens and looked for the military census. At the time, men did their military service at 18 years of age, and they had to declare themselves in order to carry out their national service, which was something like a year and a half when serving in the French army. In fact, I found in the archives the document where the father of Jean-Michel Trogneau declares his son is carrying out his military service in Algeria. Jean-Michel Trogneau was recorded as living in Algiers, not too far from the University of Algiers. Remember, Algeria didn't gain its independence until 1962. What's incredible is how we understand all of this in retrospect. In 2017, there was a visit by Emmanuel Macron to Algiers, and at the time, there were many articles in the Algerian press explaining that an entire wing of the University of Algiers had been renovated. The press stated they had done work in this wing of the university since Brigitte Macron had studied there. But obviously, there was no trace of Brigitte Trogneau in Algiers. The only person from the Trogneau family found in Algiers was Jean-Michel Trogneau.
Wow. Wow. So you know that because obviously, like you said, he had to report to recuse himself from the military. His father had to give an excuse, and the excuse was Jean-Michel Trogneau cannot do his compulsory reporting to the military because he is in Algeria. And now they're trying to say Brigitte Macron.
No. The point is when he makes the father go to Amiens to the desk to say because you 20 years old, it is 80 years old, it is normal. He say he lives in Alger, okay? Yeah. But when years later, Macron come and Algerian authorities say, okay, we are rebuilding the university because Brigitte Macron studied in this university in Alger.
Yeah,
But
I understood.
who was in Alger?
Yes, it was Jean-Michel Trogneau.
It was Jean-Michel.
Yeah, I understand.
Et le point le plus intéressant dans cette...
One interesting point is Algeria and Morocco have very different interests. and France's relationship towards Algeria and Morocco has been quite different. Whereas Algeria has a closer connection to China and Russia, the Moroccans are closer to Israel. What was interesting was that when Macron suddenly started becoming closer to Algeria, people even questioned it to the point of, is there something going on? Is there some sort of blackmail happening behind the scenes? He was the first president to try and form closer ties to Algeria like this. But suddenly, Macron reversed course and started forming greater ties with Morocco. When I published information on Brigitte and Jean-Michel Trogneau, I read an article in the La Nouvelle République d'Alger, which is essentially the equivalent of the Washington Post in Algeria, and who have ties to Algerian intelligence. They stated Macron started moving closer to Morocco due to Morocco blackmailing him using Israeli spy software called Pegasus. So when Morocco forced Macron's hand to increase ties with them, this paper in Algeria actually said that Macron is, quote, a cocaine-addicted president and psychopath under the influence of his, quote, wife, Jean-Michel Trogneau, who leads France without ever having been elected. So to conclude with a little exclusivity, the Ministry of Armed Forces in France did not want to give us military files for Jean-Michel Trogneau, saying that he was protected by a medical note which dated to 1981. So the Ministry of the Armed Forces in France refused to issue the military file of Jean-Michel Trogneau. But by following this trail, we were able to discover other documents. At the time, the father obtains a deferral from military service because his son is training in Paris, and this training is the same. We asked the same information from the Jesuits for the photos and directory of Jean-Michel Trogneau. After a year and a half of procedures, they finally gave us a photo. It's Jean-Michel Trogneau at 18 years old. There's no room for doubt. We have the directory, we have the list which certifies that it is indeed the same individual. And so there we see Jean-Michel Trogneau, and when we compare him, it's very striking since we actually see distinctive signs which aren't misleading, notably below the mouth and this thing here, which looks like a mole or a pimple. To sum things up, when you are able to control the media, when you're able to dictate the media and have them go your way, one could create from this picture a sort of Claudia Schiffer pinup who met Emmanuel Macron when he was 14. I believe in the future, producers and film executives will have a field day recreating this interesting story.
I mean, this is just incredible. I would venture to say that in France right now, a deranged homosexual is running the country with his child victim, which is to say a child that he statutorily raped. I mean, legally, what happened in the best conclusion would be that Emmanuel Macron was statutorily raped, and then he married the person who statutorily raped him, and that individual is now running the country. So I'm going to ask you some pointed questions here at the end because I want to make sure that we clarify a couple of things for the audience. Is it your view, and it's fine if you don't have a view on this, that Jean-Michel Trogneau fathered children before he transitioned to Brigitte?
Alors, sur la question de la vie de Jean-Michel.
So on the question of Jean-Michel Trogneau's life, for the moment, it's a dotted one. We know that Brigitte Macron was born Jean-Michel Trogneau on February 11th, 1945, and that she lived under this identity at least until 1963. Then there are two children who were declared by Jean-Michel Trogneau, one named Jean-Jacques Trogneau and the other Valérie. This raises questions of, would this potentially be Brigitte Macron's son? Well, this Jean-Jacques Trogneau looks like a spitting image of Emmanuel Macron. What's all that about?
Do you then have any opinion or view or lead on who was the mother then of Jean-Jacques and Valérie?
Yes, it's a woman. Alors,
I know that much.
ouais, c'est une femme qui s'appelle Véronique Dreux.
It's a woman named Véronique Dreux. She's a retired woman who was remarried to an important aristocrat from Amiens and undoubtedly raised the children of Jean-Michel Trogneau. I had a strange phone call with Véronique because while we were speaking, I realized in the background there were a bunch of people around listening to our conversation. and I asked to have some pictures and when I could obtain these, but Veronique said she would have to ask Brigitte first. I found that quite odd for a response to my question. I believe that once Emmanuel Macron is no longer in power, Pandora's box will be opened, people will start to speak, and this family's secret, which is so closely guarded, will start to unveil itself. I also believe the fall from grace for Macron will be quite severe. There's also an interesting shift in the media where news outlets such as the equivalent of the New York Times in France, who in the past have not paid any sort of noticeable attention to the fact that Brigitte is a man, have now started placing her name in quotation marks, hinting at the fact that things might not be as they seem. Even Le Monde, who for the past 12 years propped up Brigitte Macron, has now admitted that Emmanuel Macron was 14 when he met Brigitte. It used to be a conspiracy theory, but now as Emmanuel Macron nears his term's end, the secrets are coming out one by one and being acknowledged more. There was this interesting Twitter account, Zoe Sagan, which was helping compile information, and the account was shut down, and I've been pleading with the public or anyone who is in a position to help to see if this account could be reinstated, because that would be most helpful to this case. There were also 4 people detained for cyberbullying, rather than for defamation like Natasha Ray, which I find interesting because it's almost like they're regarding her as some girl on the school playground who's being bullied as a child rather than calling it what it is. It's entirely unjust for journalists to be locked up and detained for this supposed cyberbullying when their accounts and articles are all based in truth and fact.
So you have never, ever been sued for defamation, which seemed to be the lie that people were trying to tell and pretending that the story had ever been debunked. It has not been debunked. Another question that I want to ask you, if that is your theory on who mothered the children of Jean-Michel Trogneau, which means that our theory, which I believe very much, is that Jean-Michel Trogneau transitioned, took on the name of his sister, which was Brigitte. Where is the real Brigitte Trogneau today?
Je pense que c'est
This is the chief point that they don't want to unveil, the dark family secret, which is the case of identity theft and the abuse of a minor. Many journalists before me have asked, even one from Le Monde, and no member of the family has wished to respond. Phones are just being hung up. People are just not willing to speak about it. There's this interesting notion of consent. If you take someone's driver's license, even with their consent, it's still identity theft. But it's not a question of this consent. It's a question of a minor who cannot give consent. If you look at how extremely far-fetched all this is, in 2007, when she became Brigitte Macron, this happened under a false identity. This marriage of Brigitte Trogneau becoming Brigitte Macron is constructed on fraud, since Brigitte Trogneau was not the true identity. It was Jean-Michel Trogneau. The French have, in essence, placed in power a couple whose entire identity is based upon a fraudulent construct, forgery, pedophilia, and the abuse of a minor. When Vladimir Putin spoke of an empire of lies, this is what he meant. I mean, the Guinness Book of World Records couldn't beat how many lies have been told in this entire story. It's time we ask ourselves the question of young leaders. We've had this problem and questioning of morals of Obama in the US, Trudeau in Canada. Are these young leaders being engineered and controlled by blackmail?
You know, I do think, and this is rather conclusively, that the world is sort of waking up to this concept that leaders are selected and primed and groomed and sort of inserted into powerful positions. This has been a conversation that is now being had in America, even regarding Barack Obama, going backwards and realizing that a lot of what the public was told about his background didn't make any sense at all. And yet at the same time, they used the same mechanisms. They accused anybody that was prodding the narrative of being a racist. This is kind of the same thing with Brigitte Macron. Anybody that's prodding the narrative must be a misogynist or must be an ageist. It does seem like we are on a brink of a global awakening, and that's really thanks to, in America, free speech, independent journalism, being able to communicate as you and I have over X, and to establish communication and then to work with each other to expose bigger stories. But the obvious question that's going to be on everybody's mind watching this is, are you fearful for your life? Are you worried, given how much power the Macrons clearly have, given their willingness to use the Secret Service, their willingness to use the court systems, their willingness to use the law, to punish people for prodding into the story? Are you fearful that they could have you killed?
Um,
There's really an incredible aura surrounding this story. Very tragically, Natasha Ray has just been diagnosed with cancer, which she believes is due to the stress that this case has caused her and the stress the people surrounding this case have caused her. Her lawyer has recently lost guardianship of his children. The shareholder of my newspaper was targeted with a financial investigation and tax audit on all of his companies, and many influencers who have talked about this story were charged with cyberbullying. Friends tell me the police have questioned them upon their return after visiting me. I myself have not returned to France since 2021, since they came to my official residence, which was my parents' house. People came to that home in the middle of the night, knowing there was nothing there, and woke up my parents as sort of a scare tactic to them. The journalist from Le Monde who had met Natasha was followed by the Secret Service after that. So there's all these fear tactics that have been put in place, and we have to be careful. I do believe, however, on a positive note, that the power is crumbling. With the rise of BRICS and the election of Donald Trump, just as in the Second World War, we're almost at the end of an era, and at the moment, the beast is weakening, but that is also when it's at its most dangerous. These pockets of power are becoming smaller in London, Paris, and New York. I'm not afraid because I've done my work in earnest. I've done what all journalists ought to do, which is to collect photos. I've managed to collect 4 photos of Brigitte Trogneux that show this woman is not Brigitte Macron, and 8 photos of Jean-Michel Trogneux that proves Brigitte Macron is indeed this Jean-Michel Trogneux. It's all been legitimate journalistic work. I believe that when Emmanuel Macron is no longer in power and when the truth is unveiled, people actually will realize I've been quite measured in my response to this. I've done everything in an upstanding way.
Xavier, well, I know my followers always support independent journalists, and they are definitely going to want to get behind you. I know that you are working on turning this into a book, and it will be available for English translation. So, can you just let us know where they can go to support you and to support, just all of the risks that you have taken to bring this story to the forefront of the public?
alors, j'ai...
Following the pressure on my shareholder, I'm essentially starting from scratch, so support can be shown on my X account and on my newsletter and website, and also by following certain hashtags related to the case. Because this investigation is a cold case, an enigma, it really reads like a detective novel that's so far-fetched that one might at some point think the writer had taken acid. Even just the retouching of the teeth in the photos is beyond believable. But one day there will be a movie about this topic because it's as if the French people have been living in a fictional story. It'll be like someone waking up from a collective hypnosis. Do you see now? Do you still think Brigitte is really a woman? I recently saw Emmanuel Macron on TF1, a French news channel, and he said this investigation into his past is like the worst nightmare in his tenure as president of France. And since then, his support numbers have dwindled. I get the impression that his power is waning due to his lies, and that the future does not look bright for Emmanuel Macron.
Well, what I can tell you guys back home is that this is really just the tip of the iceberg. I know that I have more than piqued your interest. So much that is happening here. I agree. We are all awakening from a collective hypnosis, and we must support the independent journalists that are standing up to the state all over the world globally. There seems to be an awakening happening. Xavier Poussard is one of these tremendous journalists, really has sacrificed so much of his personal life as well as the other people who contributed to this amazing story. We will link all of that below, all of the places that you can support his work financially. Buying the book is just a small act that you can do, which allows him to continue to look into the story. I think a year from now, most of the world will be awakened to the fact that what I said 1 year ago is true. I believe that Emmanuel Macron is a homosexual man that was groomed from his youth. I believe the individual who groomed him is now his wife. I believe that his wife was born Jean-Michel Trogneau and transitioned in his early 30s. And I believe that the entire state is colluding to protect that secret. And like I said, I would stake my entire professional career on all of those points, you guys. We'll see you next time.